Sometimes when things are really working well, they just don't get the attention and acclaim that they deserve and any credit of that attention. So that's certainly the case with the Air National Guard relationship with our active Air Force today and our active Air Force leadership, which is a model that other services should strongly consider. I think we're getting there. Our next speaker deserves enormous credit for that. Air Force Secretary Deborah Lee James, and that's a really great name. I like the way you spell it. Doesn't look at a component when she needs to make a decision. She looks at the capability, regardless of whether it's the active component, the National Guard, or the Reserve. And that's all we ask. We're so honored to have her with us here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah Lee James.
Good morning, one and all. Thank you very, very much to all of the Army and Air National Guardsmen here assembled, to our industry partners, to members of the greater National Guard family, all of our family members. I do believe we have all 50 states and 3 territories and the District of Columbia represented here today. I believe all 54 of our tags are in attendance. General Grass, I know you are with us. Of course, General Clark, thank you. Always good to be with you. General Cadavi, I had a chance to chat with you just a little bit ago in the green room. General Curtis, our new head of NGAUS, so glad to be here. And Congressman Womack, I don't know if you are still here, but congratulations. I can't think of a better award recipient for the Harry S. Truman Award. So congratulations to you. It is an absolute honor to be with you today, and I certainly want to thank you, Major General Ashenhurst, and General Hargett, thank you as well for your leadership at NGAUS and for the invitation for me to come back and speak at the 137th conference. Also, General Harston, I don't know where you are, but do you have anybody here from Tennessee? Have I got that right? Woo! I thought so. I also want to thank the Tennessee Guard for being such a fantastic host for all of us here at this conference. It's been fantastic for me. I have to tell you and begin with just a few reminiscing stories because this gathering brings back a lot of memories for me. Now, this is the 137th conference, but I wonder there must be at least some of us here who remember the 114th conference, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah, in September of 1992. All right, we got some people who remember. I for sure remember it. Big time do I remember it. It was a whopping 23 years ago. It's unbelievable how time flies. At that time, I was a senior staff member on the House Armed Services Committee, and I had been invited to come speak at NGAUS really as a stand-in for my then boss, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Les Aspin, who of course went on to become Secretary of Defense. Les Aspin of Wisconsin. Is Wisconsin here today? All right. There you are. And I can remember so many colleagues from that era, so many colleagues, and I think many of them are here today. Of course, we've got General Conaway and General Temple, 2 of our former chiefs. I remember them so well and thank them very much for their leadership in those years. We've got Paul Weaver, and I saw Dave McGinnis earlier, Phil Keeley, Don Shepard, Fred Reese. So many of the old gang is here. So it's fantastic to see all of you. You were all there in '92 as well. In fact, General Conaway was, of course, the chief back in those days. And I was a very young staffer, by the way. Did I mention I was only 15 when I started? I'm not sure I brought that up. Yeah, they were older than me then and now. And matter of fact, General McKinley told me, I don't know if there's any truth to this rumor, but that General Conaway, who of course was chief by then, he actually was around at the birth of the National Guard in 1636. So that might be a little exaggerated, but that's what I hear tell. That was Herb, okay. Anyway, I remember vividly at that conference being as nervous as all get out, because by far it was the biggest crowd that I had ever spoken before. I mean, thousands of people. And I can remember literally staying up all night the night before preparing my remarks and trying to get ready for this. And I had no idea at the time just what a historic NGAUS conference this would turn out to be. Because as far as my memory goes, September of '92 was the first time during a presidential election year that both major presidential candidates were, of course, invited to address the General Conference. Both of them declined originally, but then with days yet to go, very close in, they reversed, and both came. And I'm talking here about President George Bush and the then Democratic challenger, Governor Bill Clinton. They both came that year after all, and I got to sit in the front row and I heard them both praise the National Guard commitment to America. And as well they should have, by the way, because as everyone in this room remembers, that period of the early 90s was the period of Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, which was the largest call-up of National Guardsmen and reservists at the time since the Korean War. So it was a big deal. More than 250,000 National Guardsmen and reservists answered the call, not to mention thousands of additional folks who responded to everything from the Los Angeles riots to floods in the Midwest to hurricanes and the like. Well, just a few months after that conference, of course, in January now of 1993, Governor Clinton became President Clinton, and then a few more months after that, in May of '93, I became the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, with policy responsibility and oversight responsibility for our fantastic National Guard and Reserve forces. So how about that? That was the 114th conference. So back in 1993, I called the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserve the superstars among all of the reserve components. And you know what? I think back on that, and I think we still are today. I think we are still the gold standard of how we do business together and how we integrate. In 1993, just like now, we were facing big-time budget challenges in our country and with our military, and there were some back then who were proposing very controversial downsizing ideas and controversial restructuring ideas, but not me, though. No, sir, because back in the 90s, I was a proponent of increased use of our National Guard and Reserve, of shifting new missions to the National Guard. I wanted to capitalize on the strengths and the talents. So now let's flash forward to the year 2015. It looks like I pretty much got my way, because if we go back in the more recent past, over the last 14 years of persistent war, we've had even more National Guard and Reserve who have answered our nation's call, and it has happened over and over and over again. If we just take the Army and the Air National Guard, there's more than 275,000 who have deployed over this period in a variety of missions. You just take a snapshot today, just one day, September 12th, 2015. That's one day following the 14th anniversary of that terrible day back in 2001 when the attack on America occurred. We have Air National Guardsmen right now today from Michigan who are pounding away day after day against ISIL in the Middle East. We have members of the South Dakota Air National Guard who are protecting the peace in Korea right now, September 12th, 2015. We have a rainbow unit of F-15Cs that really relate to a variety of states that right now today are reassuring our allies in Europe in the face of a resurgent Russia. Yeah, let's give them a hand too, you betcha. And of course, we have mobility and we have support forces from a variety of units and from many different states across the country that are serving all around the world. And here's a couple things that make me really, really proud as well. The state partnership program, which was so brand new back in 1993, now you have more than 70 partnerships through the National Guard. That is phenomenal. So I remember that old commercial, "You've come a long way, baby." Boy, you all have come a long, long way. And by the way, I've come a bit of a long way as well, because I'm no longer the Assistant Secretary of Defense. I get to stand before you as the 23rd Secretary of the Air Force. So how cool is that? Now, I've been on the job for just under 2 years, not quite 2 years yet. And when I was awaiting confirmation, I swear this will be my last reminiscing story. When I was awaiting confirmation, you know, they give you lots of briefings trying to get you ready to go before the Senate and do a good job answering questions for the confirmation process. And so the day came during my prep sessions when they wanted to give me sort of Guard and Reserve 101 and talk to me about the role of the National Guard and the total force and some of the missions and whatnot. And I said, you know what? I got this. I got this. No need to convince me of the value, no need to tell me about the role of our National Guard in the total force. I felt a little bit like Renee Zellweger in the Jerry Maguire movie, because all of you truly had me at hello. Now, for me, just zeroing in on the Air Force for a moment, probably the biggest thing that has changed when you contrast the 90s experience to the experience of today is the structure and the operations tempo of our Air Force. Now, I'm sure many of you are well aware, but let me just go over a few telling statistics to illustrate my point. So right now, today, in the year 2015, our Air Force is the smallest Air Force that we have ever been since our inception in the year 1947. That's the year we became a separate service. And going back to my first period of the early 1990s, we have 200,000 fewer airmen on our books today than we had 20-some years ago. At the same time, our ops tempo has just gone through the roof. It has been unrelenting. Just pick up your morning newspaper, and whether it's operations in Syria or Iraq or responding to Ebola in Africa or Pacific actions, our Air Force is very much in demand. And I don't foresee that changing very much in the foreseeable future. Third thing is our aircraft and our equipment is aging, and it's aging quickly. The average age of our fleet today is 27 years of age, and of course that means some of our fleets are older, some are younger, but 27 is getting pretty long in the tooth for aircraft, which means we need to modernize. And lastly, perhaps the most worrisome statistic of all, is that about half of our combat air forces today are not sufficiently ready in the minds of our commanders should they have to go into a high-end fight. A high-end fight, of course, is a fight where the enemy has the capability to shoot you down or interfere with you in some significant way. Surface-to-air missiles, integrated air defenses. This would be an example of a high-end fight. And about half of our combat air forces are deemed not sufficiently ready right now for such an engagement. That's the one that worries me most of all. Now, if you wrap all of this up, it tells me that we need to increasingly turn to the National Guard as well as the Reserve for experience and continuity in this fast-changing world. Simply put, you put more bang in our bucks, and this is one of the many reasons why we in the Air Force are pushing for the total force mindset to become a permanent part of our culture going forward. Let's talk big picture. Yes, we're going to do it too. Let's talk big picture priorities here for a few minutes. When I became secretary, I laid out 3 top priorities for our Air Force, and these are the 3 things that I concentrate the bulk of my time on and that I'm tracking against at all times. Number 1 is taking care of people. Number 2 is striking the right balance between today's readiness and the needs of tomorrow's modernization. And number 3, particularly in these austere budget times, we need to be efficient, we need to make every dollar count. Now, I would submit the Air National Guard and Reserve play heavily in all 3 of these priorities. In order to better institutionalize our total force efforts for the long run and improve integration and bring down barriers to the continuum of service, put more missions into the Guard and Reserve whenever possible, General Welsh and I established some time ago what we call our Total Force Continuum, or our TFC branch. This branch is led by a general officer from each of our components, and the idea of this branch is that they need to keep pushing and pushing and pushing the envelope on our initiatives so that we can turn the goals that we've laid out into reality. And by the way, here's another relatively new development. Today and into the future, we are now including 2 adjutants general in all of our key meetings and also in the pre-decisional budget discussions that we have. This is very important because it always gives us a direct link to hear your voice and to get your point of view as we are deliberating and going through some of these important budget and policy implications. So let me say special thanks to General Edwards and to General Titshaw. General Titshaw, of course, is now retired, but thank you so much, buddy, for everything you've done. General Edwards, thanks for continuing to serve with us in this capacity, and also General Rice. Look forward to having you fully on the team. Thank you for all of your inputs. Now, for the rest of my time this morning, I'd like to talk about some of the steps that we've taken to capitalize and improve our total Air Force, as well as describe some of the areas where, quite frankly, we've still got challenges ahead and we just need to get on it and we need to address them. So let me start at the very beginning with the most important thing of all, and that's some of the initiatives targeted at people. Because you see, in every job I've ever had throughout my professional career, I've always believed if you get it right on the people issues, the rest of the issues will more smoothly follow. So first off, as we have downsized, particularly as we have downsized on the active duty side of the house, we've taken a number of steps to make it easier and more attractive so that we capture that talent into our Guard and Reserve. So for example, we've amended the Palace Chase program and we've changed the scrolling process to try to make it easier and speed it up. So these are 2 approaches that we've taken so far. By the way, I want you all to know we have now stopped the downsizing of the Air Force. Enough is enough, and as far as I'm concerned, we've probably gone a bit too far. And so therefore, we are going to be embarking on a period of modest upsizing, not huge numbers, but modest upsizing, and this will be for the active duty, the National Guard, and the Reserve. So that's the first kind of key area I want to tell you all about people. Another area relates to health care. Health care is certainly a major issue for our National Guard members. It's a major issue for families as well. And so in our budget going forward, we have fully funded the TRICARE Reserve Select. I think that's really important for our families. Another thing we've done is we've increased the number of available man-days for Guard utilization, and we simplified the process for 1095 waivers. What that means is basically we are thinking through in advance the types of activities we would like our National Guardsmen and reservists to come on active duty a year or 2 or 3 out. We're thinking it through in advance, and then very importantly, we're putting our money where our mouth is, and we're putting the budget dollars against it so that we can bring National Guardsmen and reservists on duty for operational missions, give some predictability, and be able to serve the combatant commanders to a higher degree of fidelity. Furthermore, we've increased our support services to all airmen, not just those on Title X orders. We are in the process now of placing a full-time sexual assault prevention and response coordinator at every Air Guard wing, and we've recently opened reporting options to our civilian airmen as well. In the future, we plan to maximize our manpower by cross-flowing high-potential officers in command billets between components, and continuum of service initiatives we believe will, over time, make it easier for airmen to move between the active, the National Guard and Reserve, and back, perhaps, throughout different times in their career. Now, why is all this relevant? Why is it important? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's all about the talent. We need the talent going forward. We need talented airmen like Staff Sergeant Douglas Kajigian, your 2015 Air National Guard Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year, and one of our 12 Air Force Outstanding Airmen of the Year. Staff Sergeant Kajigian is a pararescue jumper assigned to the 103rd Rescue Squadron, New York Air National Guard, and his military career includes multiple deployments where he has provided medical care and saved lives in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Horn of Africa. So it's all about the talent. It's about talent like Specialist Alec Scarlatos, Oregon Army National Guard. That's the name all Americans now know, a recently returned Afghan veteran who, along with a couple of his friends, including our very own Airman Spencer Stone, confronted and faced down evil a few weeks ago on a French train and prevented what I am sure would have been a bloodbath. So the people on that train were very lucky that those three young men were present. So this is all about talent, and this is also where we need everybody's help. We need to continue to recruit, develop, retain, and reward our airmen and our soldiers, like Staff Sergeant Kajigian and Specialist Scarlatos. And I would challenge all of you here at NGAUS to help us continue to figure out ways to do just that. Now, once we have the high caliber personnel, we have to make sure that they are ready. Again, all you have to do is look at your morning news, and everywhere around the world, people want more Air Force. There are many, many threats out there. While we're doing this, we also need to modernize, which brings me to my second priority, which is balancing the needs of today, our readiness of day, but while also we have to modernize our Air Force. It's not an either-or proposition, by the way. We need to do both. And what makes this so difficult is the budget situation that we are facing. By the way, it would be hard enough to get all of this done under the President's budget level, which for the Air Force is $10 billion more than sequestration. But I'm here to tell you it is really untenable if we end up with sequestration or a long-term CR on Capitol Hill. So once again, I want to take this opportunity to call upon our Congress to lift sequestration. We need to send that provision to the boneyard once and for all. And give us a full-up authorization and appropriation bill as close to October 1 as possible. No long-term CR. Many people actually don't realize a long-term CR would in many ways be more detrimental, certainly is the case for the Air Force, than sequestration. So we've got to get this fixed. Let me now touch upon some of the initiatives that impact training and new missions and modernization. So first, we fully funded flying hours and exercises and other forms of training. And of course, we did this just like we do everything on a total force basis. We've allowed commanders the latitude to put guardsmen on orders for mission essential skills training, the so-called seasoning days, in order to meet AFSC and mission training requirements. We've instituted what we call the TFAM initiative, Total Force Aircrew Management. Before TFAM, each component used its own model to manage officer and enlisted aviators, but now with TFAM, there's a single model for all components to make training and resource decisions, provide policy guidance, and make integrated recommendations to solving total force problems. And we're continuing to look, we're doing this constantly, at shifting additional missions to the Guard and Reserve whenever possible through what we call our high-velocity analysis approach. And most recently, this is happening in the areas of space, cyber, and ISR. Today, we have 7 Air National Guard space squadrons, which handle everything from space control to space warning and satellite operations. In cyber, the Guard leads 2 of the Air Force Space Command's 20 cyber protection teams and supports 1 of 4 national mission teams. Our Guard squadrons are very, very busy, as you can imagine, trying to protect Department of Defense information networks. And we do expect to stand up additional cyber capability in the Guard in the near future. In terms of the ISR, I have to give a quick shout out to the 137th Air Refueling Wing out of Oklahoma. All right, Oklahoma's in the back. They're in the process of converting to the MC-12, and their first aircraft did arrive this summer. We have multiple units, by the way, in a number of states that are making similar conversions, doing away with older weapons, and particularly going in favor of the MQ-9 Reaper. And boy, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the National Guard for stepping up to the plate and helping us overall to reduce some of the ops tempo in the remotely piloted aircraft world. So these initiatives, of course, they all relate to what's happening today, but as I said repeatedly, we have to keep our eye on tomorrow as well, which means we need to modernize. And so related to that, we are fielding new equipment in many cases in a near concurrent fashion for both the active duty and the Guard and Reserve. So I give you the examples of the KC-46A, which not too long into the future will be in New Hampshire, and the F-35 bed down. Not too long, it's coming to Vermont. So we're doing this in near concurrent fashion. Now I know how to get them to clap. Yeah, I just got to mention the state. Okay. You know, perhaps the greatest challenge for our Guard and Reserve when it comes to readiness and modernization, so here comes the work yet ahead that I told you, not everything's perfect here, is we have to keep the oldest parts of the Air Force fleet tactically relevant and interoperable with the rest of the force, because we can't get it all done at once. The C-130H situation, I think, provides a good case in point. We project that all C-130H aircraft will reside in the reserve components in 2017, and we have worked for years through budgetary and legislative restrictions to craft a plan that, above all else, would meet FAA and international avionics standards to keep the fleet flying past 2020 until we can modernize the overall fleet. And we now think we have a way forward, and special thanks to the TAGs who have helped us work this out with the Congress. Special thanks to General Tonini, who took a leading role, and it just goes to show what we can accomplish together when we go shoulder to shoulder on an important issue. Now, people in my position and people in your position, we are stewards of the taxpayer dollar, and those dollars are precious. They're in short supply these days, which is why I always talk about my third priority. We have to be efficient. We have to make every dollar count. This is really, really important. Now, I have long believed, and I have long advocated, that the Guard and Reserve are a great buy for the American taxpayer. If you're not in continual use, and of course we use these forces a lot, but not continuously, but you are there when we need you, well, then you're about 40% of our overall manpower in the military and only about 10% of our budget. I used to be in business. I'll take those numbers any day of the week. That's a good deal. I've been particularly impressed with our Guard and Reserve associate units. There's a variety of types of associations around the country. I've seen a number of them. I think they save money. They help us to integrate. Specifically, I believe there's 24 associations of some sort at the moment in our Air National Guard. There's more than 100 of these examples across the force. And during my tenure, I've had the privilege to visit in 8 of those associations, but I've got more planned in the future. So I'm very, very impressed with that. And by the way, I need to give a shout out to the happy hooligans of the 119th Wing, North Dakota Air National Guard. We've got the hooligans here? All right, we got some of them. Their long aviation tradition lives on through their conversion to high-demand missions in the RPA world, intelligence targeting, and their associations with Minot and Grand Forks Air Force bases. And one final shout out, this is not an association, but it was a very, very memorable experience. And that is, I want to thank the 109th Airlift Wing of the New York Air National Guard, who performs a very, very specialized mission in support of the National Science Foundation in Antarctica. You see, they fly and they support C-130s that operate on skis, that take off and land on the ice. So General Clark and I and just a handful of other folks were so privileged to spend a few unbelievable days with the New York Air National Guard on the ice in Antarctica. It's truly one of the experiences that I will never, ever forget. Now, I could go on and on with stories, but I think you get the picture. The bottom line is we have to ensure that our ranks are filled with high qualified, talented, total force airmen and soldiers ready to lead our troops into the next generation of warfighting, security, cooperation, and homeland support. And the only way I know how to do this is to build a force functionally integrated and operationally indistinguishable, a force that is truly integrated and ready and modern. Now, although it may seem that we have lots of challenges from a policy perspective and law and budgets and so forth, and we do, I see even greater opportunities than I see challenges. Because again, world conditions tell me there's more Air Force that is needed constantly in all of our 5 core missions, which brings me back to the point we need to work together. I want to finish here this morning by giving you my vision of where I see our total Air Force in, let's say, 10 years from now. I certainly still won't be in this seat, but believe me, I'll be watching. I do believe our Air Force will remain a smaller Air Force, certainly smaller than the 1990s, but no smaller than we are today. We'll be a more capable Air Force in the years to come. We'll be innovative. Our Air Force will be highly integrated, even more so than it is today. It'll be more ready and more modern. Our Air Force will, in fact and in perception, be viewed by all quarters as adding value to our taxpayers in a big way, and of course we'll continue to step up to the plate when our nation asks us to respond overseas, in protecting the homeland, and when disaster strikes here at home. Our people will be able to flow more easily between the components of the Air Force in the future than they are today. Overall, I do believe, and this is a good thing, we will be relying more, not less, on our Air National Guard and Reserve going forward, and we'll have leaders at all levels that understand one another better, precisely because they will have had more experience working together. Now, of course, 10 years from now, maybe earlier, but we'll certainly have a new Chief of Staff by that time. And by the way, I can't say enough about our current Chief of Staff, General Mark Welsh. What a fantastic partner he has been for me. But of course, General Welsh won't be in place forever, nor will I. So as I look out into the future, I am certain that we'll have a new chief. And you know what? She will have had a major assignment or exposure to the National Guard and Reserve because it will simply be expected 10 years from now or so. It will be the norm. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my vision for the future of our total Air Force. Now I ask you, let's work together and make it a reality. Thank you again so much for inviting me to be part of this conference, and thank you most of all for everything you're doing for our country. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or run over? Okay. All right.
And the mics should be on.
Okay. And I think we do have time for a few questions, if there are questions. Or maybe we could go have lunch, too.
Oh, you had to say that.
Okay.
Here he comes. Running. He thinks he's in the Army and has to run.
Good morning, ma'am. Lieutenant Colonel Leanne Tumbleson from Oklahoma. I've been reading about your initiatives to increase minorities and women in the officer corps. And in the Air National Guard, many of our line officers happen to be women and minorities. So I'm wondering if there's any initiatives to allow line officers to become commanders of flying wings.
Where are you, Leanne, first of all, just so I can look? Okay, I see you now. So what Leanne is referring to is we rolled out back in March, I believe it was, a series of initiatives which the Chief and I and Chief Cody hoped would advance the ball for our total Air Force to try to up the game on diversity in our Air Force. And by the way, diversity to me means gender, it means race, it means ethnicity, but it also means diversity of background and experience. So I'm very interested in having people who have had different experiences and different skill sets at decision-making tables at all levels within our Air Force. I think it improves all of us. So increasing for women and minorities is part of it, but it's not all of it, is what I wanted to say. So we're constantly looking for new ideas. I think perhaps the key items that you're referring to is when it comes to women in the piloting fields, as one example, we found that we have, even though all aircraft have been open to women for 20-some years, we still have a relatively small percentage of women who pursue that. So we had several initiatives that are designed to at least open up and get more women who might be willing to compete for the piloting slots. There's also a mentoring program that's been rolled out. That, by the way, is open for everybody. Personally, I'm doing 5 under what we call My Vector. I have 5 new mentees from across the force. So there's a series of things there, and we're constantly looking for new ideas. So if you have a specific suggestion, please shoot me an email. Would love to hear from you.
Madam Secretary, I'm Colonel Wiegand, Wisconsin National Guard. Regarding your discussion on modernizing the 4th Gen fleet, make sure that we're able to go against a high-end peer threat. My concern is with Homeland Defense. We currently have F-16s deployed to Poland, training with the Polish Air Force. And yet the aircraft that we have executing Homeland Defense are not as capable as the aircraft that we're selling to our foreign partners. As we try to modernize to make sure that we're relevant, where do you see F-16 radar modernization program as a priority to balance that versus procurement of the F-35?
So it's hard to say which is more important. These things are all very important, of course. And by the way, on this situation that you referred to on the upgrades for the F-16 and the radars, we did propose a reprogramming to the Congress to begin to get at this problem in an urgent manner, which would have allowed us to move quickly. It did require all 4 committees to sign off on that proposal. Regrettably, one of the committees said no. So this throws us back, not quite to the drawing board, but what it means is we've got to do a competition. We can't go quite as quickly as we otherwise would have. That doesn't mean it has to take forever, and competition is obviously a good thing across the board for our government. So what we need to do is quickly regroup and figure out how will we now move forward in a competitive environment and get it done more quickly than perhaps would otherwise be the case.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mike?
Ma'am, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Don Dunbar, the Adjutant for Wisconsin. I work for Jeff Wiegand. I want to thank you for coming and for your leadership. You mentioned General Wells, the leadership of the Air Force has been exceptional and great partnership. First, I would just say that I also share Colonel Wiegand's concern and your concern. As that threat to our homeland evolves, deeply concerned that we don't know when the next 9/11 might be, but shame on us all if something happens and we could have prevented that. So I appreciate your leadership, and if anything that we can do as Adjutant General to go with you to try and engage the Hill on those important upgrades to the F-16, I think it's important to our nation's defense. But my question has to do with your vision. You talked about 10 years out. I think it'll be the convention, probably in Wisconsin again, will be celebrating the newest Harley models. The Packers have another NFL trophy. And as we look to the Air Force fleet, and the F-35's coming online, and hopefully we've got these F-16s modernized, when you look at the fleet, with KC-46, the new bomber coming online, do you see other aircraft in the fleet, when we talk about homeland defense, things like that, maybe 80, 60% capable, something like that, lined up with our new trainers, or do you see it just a high-end Air Force and obviously a little bit more capable? I'm thinking about the capacity and the capability of our pilots and the need for this Air Force to keep flying at the high end and pretty close to the high end. Have you thought about that?
So if I could just begin by saying, General Dunbar, I'm so glad you have a high IQ and you're a guy in blue. I just want to get that out there. Yeah.
And we love our Army, man.
Yes, no, I love my Army too. No, they tipped me off that you had that exchange with General Milley, so I had to throw in. I have given some thought to this. I think it used to be that we thought in the Air Force that if we had all high-end equipment, that certainly we could deal with contingencies which are, I'll say, lower end. I certainly mean no disrespect about that, but it goes to this issue of what kind of capability do the enemy on the ground or the enemy in the air have against you. I think that's the way we used to look at it. And now, of course, we're in a budget crunch. And so the question becomes, if we were to insert different platforms that would be less expensive, perhaps, it could help us with some of the so-called lower-end threats, where would we get the money from? So that's a challenge. It's not perhaps something that we're going to give up on. We still need to think about it and try to work it through, but it's a huge challenge. I'd be lying to you if I told you that it wasn't. In terms of other new aircraft, though, beyond the F-35 and the KC-46 and the bomber, we also are trying to kick it up a notch and get going on our JSTARS replacement, as well as on the TX. So those are two programs that certainly we are looking to launch, I'll say, over the next several years, at least get going with some of the EMD work. And then the last thing has to do with, of course, a new helicopter for rescue, combat rescue helicopter approach. That one launched about a year or so ago, year and a half ago, I guess. So that too will be coming online, and we need to make sure that we've got the right mix for the future of the combat rescue mission as well.
Thank you, ma'am.